Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. We are once again coming to you from the technical building at Skywalker Ranch, which, as many of you know, is the home of Skywalker Sound. I spent about a decade working here in the early 2000s, and it is always a great pleasure for me to come back to the ranch and talk with my old colleagues about their work. And today we're discussing F1, the movie, the turbocharged new feature from director Joe Kosinski. Today I'm sitting down with my friends Al Nelson, supervising sound editor and sound designer, who won an Oscar for his work on Joe's last movie, Top Gun Maverick, as well as re-recording mixers Juan Peralta and two-time Oscar winner Gary Rizzo. And joining us remotely from New Zealand, supervising sound editor and three-time Academy Award nominee, Gwendolyn Yates-Whittle. New Zealand. What could Gwen possibly be doing in New Zealand? Well, I'm sure that I don't know, but maybe if we're lucky, she'll come on the podcast before the end of the year and talk to us about it. Before we dive into F1, this is a spoiler alert. We do discuss some scenes in detail and we give away some plot points, so please make sure you watch the film before you listen to this conversation. And I highly encourage you to make your way to the nearest Dolby Cinema, where F1 the movie is playing right now in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. So we've all seen race car movies before. This is a very well-established Hollywood genre, and it's one that creates a lot of possibilities for fantastic sound. So that's where I started our conversation, by asking the team how director Joe Kosinski approached F1 the movie, and what's fresh and unique about the sound of this film. Here's supervising sound editor Al Nelson.
So Joe was here on Spiderhead, actually, when we found out he was doing this next film, F1. We were all set to do a tornado movie with him, and he said, no, actually, I wrote that, but I've got something cool I'm going to do instead. And he mentioned that he was doing a Formula One movie. Juan went crazy.
Because you're a big Formula One nut. You've been for a long time.
I've been, since like the 90s, I've been watching. So
you must have
this was a dream come true. As soon as he said it, I was like, Joe, he's like, yeah. You got it. It's all you.
Don't let me down, Joe. But he referenced, you talk about the classic films. He referenced specifically Grand Prix. That's that's the bar for racing movies. In my opinion, and many people's opinion, one of the best sounding racing movies ever. And it has a lot of parallels with this F1 movie. The actors drove. They had these, they used real Formula One cars. The sound was, huge. And so Joe mentioned that and said, you should watch this film. This is definitely what I'm referencing.
What year was that?
66.
So that's just that's a mono. It's about as simple as you get, right?
Yeah, but as far as, how it was reproduced, but it might have been stereo. The films are definitely starting to get a little more dynamic. But yeah, 66, Frankenheimer. And they took a long time to really record it properly, and all the sound is authentic, and Joe wanted to do the same thing. So early days here, and just like he has done with his other films, he's like, we're going to do a lot of recording, we're going to get all the authentic sounds, and we're going to do this as close to the real deal as we possibly can. So yeah, we were off to the races, literally.
And obviously, the difference for you guys between now and those other movies, you got a much bigger dynamic envelope to play with than they did. So, but that's good and bad, right?
Yeah, with Atmos and all these speakers and the subwoofer and everything, now you can really kind of show off this these cars. And in all my years of watching Formula One, I've only ever watched it either live, which is really loud, or on TV. It's been a broadcast. So to put it in a theater with all these speakers and all this like dynamic range, it was challenging. It's like, well, how I don't want it to sound different than the actual cars, but I want it to be a cinematic experience. So it was like, doing that little tight walk, tightrope.
When was the last time you won a race?
Sunday, Daytona?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant Formula One.
Oh, I'm sorry. Then same as you.
Salva Bederoben. When I interview with you, many veteran drivers...
Yeah, who all turned you down?
How many?
7.
That's a lot.
I'm number 7?
You're 8.
This is a disaster.
Starting to feel more like a 9.
Technically, there is one who I've not heard from yet.
So I am a 9.
You know how numbers work, right?
In business, my most inspired ideas come late.
Yeah, best things in life usually arrive ninth, right?
With respect, Ruben, I cannot condone we spend our only test day giving your long-lost teammate an audition.
Gaspar, you misunderstand. We're not auditioning him. He's auditioning us.
I love to talk about the first 10 minutes of a movie and kind of how the director sets the rules of the road and explains how the language that they're going to use to tell this story. And there's a lot going on in the first 10 minutes of this, movie. We establish Brad Pitt's character. There's this kind of interesting montage of crashing waves and kind of home video footage of a race that we don't know yet we'll find out later what that is. And then bam, we go right into the 24 hours of Daytona sequence. And that is just this, that's an amazing race sequence, but you got helicopters, you got fireworks, you're putting everything. So I'm kind of curious for you guys, knowing also that you have to get to the end, you need to leave room. You can't tell us about kind of the design for that first 10 minutes and how you filled that stuff out, but also how you left some surprises, some tricks left in your bag.
Even though this isn't Formula One, this is a very visceral and authentic experience. We are at Daytona, the 24 hours of Daytona. And so, Joe wanted to first establish that excitement and that just raw energy of there's multiple kinds of cars going on. There's not just GTs, there's all these other, types of engines. So it's kind of a free-for-all in a lot of ways. So he wanted to introduce this character, Sonny, as this kind of moonlighter, kind of a bit, down in his luck. He's sleeping in his van, eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And when he presented this opening sequence, he said, it's got to just reel the audience in. He wanted it to be this kind of tentpole event. So not including the opening, which was something that kind of came later on in the process, but just the idea of Daytona being this immersive, huge event with these, with this Porsche. And, we had great opportunities to actually get that car and go out and do all this recording. We've got Led Zeppelin, we've got just this PA and all of this chaos. So he wanted it to be just raw energy and to establish the dangerous character that is Sonny Hayes, and just how to make us just wonder, who is this guy, as opposed to just this professional F1 driver. And then we introduced the opening kind of as we were going into the mixing process. These guys can talk about that.
So we start the movie mono, believe it or not. The waves crashing and all that stuff starts out pretty kind of towed in and very quiet and very, so that we do have a place to go, at least in reel one. And and we go all the way. But it's I think Joe really wants people to kind of settle in. What are they listening to? What are we watching? What is this? And then all of a sudden you're in Daytona. You're like, oh my God. You start feeling the blood rushing and everything, get the excitement going. And now that you've gone through all that, now you're in. Now you know Sonny Hayes. He's a crazy driver. He drives really good. He wins races. Now let's go into the real F1. So it's kind of weird to start the F1 movie with not an F1 race, right, but it works. It works great.
And it establishes this character and the song.
I love the opening because of its grit more than anything. You are introduced to Sonny in a cold open in a way where you're not exactly sure what is going on. And some of these things, even in the dream, they're not even directly addressed in the film. The waves, he puts on his headphones and he kind of takes himself to this Zen place. And he does have these flashbacks and these memories of the past that are truly the core of him and his character. And you're not fully aware how he has gotten to this place, but you are intrigued by him. Who is this guy doing pull-ups in his van? This guy that is eating peanut butter sandwiches before somebody's been banging on the door. It's a cold drop that you haven't really experienced in a while. And then, the dynamic of he opens that van door and he's in this race. And yeah, there is a
midnight.
beautiful at midnight. Yeah, it's the
yeah.
middle of the night too. Like, who is this guy? Clearly, as we get into the race, he's doing things in non-conventional ways. We make reference to, like, he's a bit of a renegade. It's kind of a little bit dangerous, but like, damn it, that's the way you got to do this if you're going to win a race. Like, that's some classic filmmaking right there, and you love that. You get that sensibility of classic filmmaking in the first 10 minutes of the film, and you've got this classic song that's playing underneath it all, which I saw an early cut of the film, and when I heard that cue, my first question was, are we keeping that cue? Because this cue sounds expensive. Like, we all know that, it's Led Zeppelin. Is this a placeholder? What is this?
And Joe was like, money's no object. We're keeping
Well, I'm not sure we would go that far.
Yeah.
But when I heard it, I was intrigued. Like, are we really, this is a great cue. I don't know what else you can replace this with that's going to hold that kind of dynamic and hold the attention and have the ebbs and the flows that song naturally has. And in listening to it, I love this song. I'm a Led Zeppelin fan. Okay, so it was easy for me to just totally sink my teeth into it. But I knew that with that Jimmy Page guitar, it's going to sit right in the range of the Cars. All right, so like, I feel the challenge right out of the gate. Like, I want this song to live because I love this song, but it could very easily become a complete clash and a complete conflict of sonic interest. So for me, I took that song and kind of tore it apart, broke it into, we've got a lot of newer tools in this era that we can take music and we can rip it apart in unique ways, where I wanted to make it a little bit more percussion-oriented version of Whole Lotta Love versus, a ripping Les Paul that I know is in the track that can support it, but I wanted to be able to kind of ebb and flow with the Cars. So for me, it's actually a little bit more of a highlight on the Bonham percussion and the Bonham drums more than anything else. I mean, you get the vocal, we're riding the vocal in and around the Cars as these moments come and go, but it's the drums that kind of play the clock through the whole piece. For me, that was an absolute playground for sound.
And also occasionally you just reach over and slap Juan's hand, right? Like
I think
take the effects
we've
down.
got a better shorthand than
It's just a look at this point.
I love that conversation about the music, and I had a note to ask you about this. I mean, there's a lot of big songs in here. You've got that great montage of like the drivers getting ready for the race to Queen's We Will Rock, and but also Hans Zimmer's score. Mm-hmm. It's big, it's dynamic, and one of the things I've always actually really admired about Joe Kosinski as a director is like he is not afraid of music.
No,
I still love that, the way you mixed Daft Punk and Tron.
Yeah.
Like that's classic to me. So talk to me a little bit about Hans' score and integrating it into the mix. And
well, in the big picture, you said it. Joe is pretty fearless when it comes to using music, whether it is score or whether they are songs. And I had a joy mixing on Spiderhead. We made reference to Spiderhead earlier, which had all these yacht rock style songs that, again, he used fearlessly. Like, we know those songs are moderately cheesy, but we're going to score the movie with it. We're absolutely going for it. And I love that fearlessness. And if there is a fearless composer, it is Hans. And I've done a couple of films with Hans and with Steve Mazzaro, and they brought some classic Hollywood use of themes into this score that just made it so comfortable, that made it so endearing, that I believe, makes the audience really lean into it and really get comfortable with the film through those themes. What I love about the We Will Rock You bit is that there is that, it is sound design to some degree through the use of music and music editorial. Chris Newland and Ryan Rubin were music editors, and they really helped build that transition moment, getting out of what is the real speed Queen, We Will Rock You, into this kind of drawn out, almost slow motion to suspension of time, holding your breath before the Cars take off. And it is that kind of suspension of time that builds the adrenaline in that moment, builds the anticipation, that makes you feel like you are really in that seat. It helps the audience to hold their breath.
And again, you're in Sonny Hayes' head. We're constantly trying to figure out who is this Sonny Hayes? He's getting in the car and he says, "What are you doing here, Sonny?" And the music is just pulsing, and you're like, this guy is intense.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the music
we do it
really
so many
drives
different
that.
ways. The music is absolutely behind that, but also it is the waves, and we don't even necessarily address waves directly, but it's also the concept of flying, which we address later in the film. It is the idea of him just going into his space. We don't even mention the Seven of Spades, which maybe you shouldn't include that in this podcast, but we don't even mention it, but it's another one of these elements of this character who is so, he's got such charisma and clearly a wisdom-filled individual, somebody that has so much experience, somebody that has seen the highs and seen the lows, somebody that's been wrapped up in the hospital, and somebody that's walked away from it all, somebody that's reevaluating everything that's going on in their lives. Why are you doing this? It really is the question of the movie. What is it that motivates you to make the choices that you make? And sometimes we talk about some of them, but we don't talk about all of them in this movie. And
Yeah,
I think
the
it's one of the
mismatched socks.
Yeah, mismatched socks, like
all
this-
these voodoo things that he's doing that just makes him.
Yeah, and the audience acknowledges it and doesn't really question it, but they're keeping track of
This
it.
guy's not normal.
Yeah.
Gwen, I would say race cars, not really an environment known for being conducive to good production recordings. So tell me about the production recordings on on this movie, especially in the race scenes.
Gareth John, the production recordist, did it so he just did a fabulous job. We were able to use probably 80% of the production without. I mean, also, and we have a lot of good cleanup tools now too. It's a lot easier for us to take stuff out. There was the one scene with "We Will Rock You." That was shot at Silverstone with the music, with the crowd, with the announcers going. So we did ADR that because we couldn't extract. There was so much extra noise on that, so we did loop that. But a lot of the, again, they're wearing helmets a lot, which is also a beautiful way to change lines and re-record things like that. So they did a lot of wild lines. We did a lot of wild recordings, and sync was perfect every time.
Because comms is a huge, part of this movie. The voices that the drivers are hearing in their heads, and the way they communicate with each other. So I'd love for you to talk, Gwen, about kind of prepping those elements, and then Gary about mixing that stuff.
We did a version where we didn't really have the Gary's full mix complement available. So for the temps, we just put speakerphone on those things, and then we listened more to the direct comms that they used for Drive to Survive. So we were able to listen to the actual communications between them, and then Gary fine-tuned the way we did that. And so it was a big collaboration between us and Gary. And we did not end up using speakerphone in the end. I don't even remember what you used, Gary.
Yeah, it was a combination of things, but the big important part, I believe, to this answer is that yes, the production was great, and yes, we were able to salvage 80% or whatever the percentage actually was. But what really was great was that a lot of the dialogue that came off of the windy wall, which is how would you describe the
Pit wall?
The pit wall. It's where the engineers,
like when they're.
Yes.
I was really intrigued by this. Yeah,
trackside.
They call that the windy wall.
Right.
Got it.
Right, because I don't know Formula One. That full disclosure. We go to Juan for information. They tell me they call it the windy wall. Those guys had their comms mics on, and they were practical, so we could capture them as well as the booms, as well as lavs, as well as all that. Those comm mics I found to be absolutely delicious. I thought they sounded so real and so great. They were FUTs, but not your traditional walkie-talkie FUTs.
Right.
And for me, that was the big thing. Again, back to that first watch of the movie, if 90% of the communication of this movie is over radio FUTs, it can get really piercing, really gnarly, really annoying really quickly. So it was a matter
and just
of
exhausting to listen to.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to be able to communicate the fact that, yes, they are FUTs. Yes, this is radio broadcast communication amongst the team, but you want it to be in a relatively comfortable way. So actually the FUTs for dialogue were, I think, one of the more complicated parts of it because of that character. Make it futzed, but not so futzed that it's too futzed, but futzed enough that it communicates what's actually going on here. P.S. It has to match the production comm futz. as best you can as you need to cut back and forth. And even more complicated is when there is radio communication on one side happening, but then mid-line you cut to a different perspective, like you cut from the windy wall back to the driver. Well, you want that futz to be a different futz, but not a completely different futz, but just enough of a different futz that it's like, holy cow.
How long was your dialogue pre-dub on this?
We did it in waves. We had, and maybe this is something to document, we did a pretty robust first temp mix, and we did it back in October. Mm-hmm. And Gwen, you're going to have to remind me how many days of the dialogue pre-dub budget we took in preparation for that temp, because we knew stuff like this was coming up. We needed to at least take a big step forward in the maturity of and development of the track to get us into temp 1. It couldn't just be a quickie temp. Did we take 5 days of dialogue pre-dub before that temp?
We took at least 5 days. It may have been more.
Okay.
Just to go back to the futz conversation, there's another futz where they're all sitting in a room quietly with all have headphones on, which is another futz because they're all talking to they're talking to Silverstone or wherever.
And it's being documented and recorded, all that internal team communication.
That was an interesting point, because the first time that sequence happened, I'm like, why are they on headphones? They're all sitting around a table talking to each other. But then I realized, they're remoting into a whole other team that's doing analytics and all this other stuff as well.
There's the factory. So I'm a little bit like Gary. I know absolutely nothing about F1. The terminology doesn't make any sense. But I got to say, the experience of watching this movie, I knew exactly what was happening. It was all crystal clear. Oh, good.
Thanks to Juan.
Well, I sort of realized about halfway through how much heavy lifting the announcers are doing in this movie.
Yeah.
The characters who are I'm sure they're saying things that like maybe they wouldn't on a regular F1 podcast, like, oh, it's raining. Is he going to stay on his slicks? That's basic stuff. But for an audience that doesn't know anything, like this is actually really good information. So I'm in love with those characters apparently these are real guys.
Yeah, they are the real guys.
Crofty and Brundle. Crofty and Brundle.
They let them watch the movie and announce while they were watching the movie.
That's genius.
So all that stuff is authentic stuff that they would actually say. I mean, there were a couple plot points that they knew they had to fit. And then Juan came in really handy because he really helped winnow down how much they were saying to have it make sense for people who don't know anything and for the people who know what's going on, to have it be authentic for both kinds of viewers, because Juan knew both sides of it.
One of the great things that I thought Joe did was, and I believe Lewis Hamilton had a lot to say about it, was including the actual guys that do the broadcast, that every F1 fan knows them. Right. They hear them, they already know. Right. And so to bring them to the movie, which just made it even more authentic. These are the guys we're used to hearing when we're watching the races. These are the two guys. And I thought that was a genius way to bring Formula One to all those people that don't really know Formula One. This is what it sounds like. Literally, these are the guys that do the announcing. These are the recordings of the cars. This is what the pit stops sound like. Everything about the movie is literally a lift from the sport and introduction to everyone. And so it really is great that you were able to understand what's happening in the film just by listening to those guys, because we worked really hard on. They did a long pass of calling the races or whatever, and then there was a lot of stuff that was like, too many words. We just need a little bit. We just need that. That's the most important part. And then we slowly started to kind of dwindle it down a little bit, enough to get exactly what you need, but still leave space for the music and the effects, and then in the movie part of it, because it could have been a narration.
I'm sure those guys were like wall to wall. Like
they are. Right? They will go if you tell them go. They will go.
So Gwen, was that an ADR session with those guys that you covered?
Several ADR sessions. It was all Thailand to London, but they worked together all the time. They were it was fabulous watching them. The shorthand they have with one another. And they would just take it back and forth and they'd say, well, I would say that line and I would say this line, kind of thing. But we have hours and hours and hours of them.
Let's talk about miking those cars.
Yeah.
I feel like you're like the grand master at this. I remember we had a long conversation on Top Gun Maverick about miking those planes, and I feel like you're a grandmaster of taking these super loud sources and figuring out how to mic them in a way that's just not overmodulated distortion and horrible noise. So what was your experience? Tell us about miking the F1s.
The F1 cars. Well, I would say Joe is the grandmaster at giving us these opportunities. God bless him. Because he gets it. He knows that you can't just say, I want this to be an authentic Formula One movie, figure it out. He was like, we're going to start early. We're going to give you whatever resources you need, and everything is going to be 100% perfect. And he's not like, this has to be perfect. It's just like, we're going to do this together. What do you need? I'm going to help you. Let's get going. And so early on, he was sending clips of, this is the kind of stuff I'm invested in. Of course, Grand Prix was a reference. And then, of course, Drive to Survive and all the F1. So we immersed ourselves early on. And then I understood F1 not nearly to the degree that Juan did. What I didn't understand, what we didn't understand and learned as we went was, oh, by the way, these F1 cars, you're not allowed to touch them. You can't breathe on them. And more importantly, it's not even just how much does a car cost, but how many people does it take just to operate it? There's not just, you can't just put the driver in and go. And this sport is overseen by the FIA, the organization that says this is when you can start it up. This is when it's in the garage. You can't just get Lewis Hamilton to take a car
lap
out
for you.
And on Tuesday we're going to go drive. You can't do that. Those cars are very, very closely monitored. And so when I first was kind of speaking with Joe, I said, I was wondering maybe between seasons, we'll just go over to Silverstone for a couple of days and I'll just record them. He says, you're not going to do that. That's going to be millions of dollars. And so what we realized was that we have to go to the events in the same way that they shot the events, which is go to these races and get as many microphones around the track as you can, and just pick up everything possible. And so, initially the goal was, okay, what does it sound like to be in an F1 car? These are different, very specific cars. These are V6 hybrid Formula One cars. They have a very specific sound that anybody who's in F1 knows. And so we needed to get
And
those.
do they sound pretty similar to each other, or does each car have its own distinct?
Well, they're slightly distinct, but they're pretty close.
Yeah.
When they're going fast, they're pretty much the same. When they're slower, you can tell Red Bull from a Ferrari, from a Mercedes. There's basically 4 engines, so you can kind of tell them, and real F1 fans could probably tell it. For the average ear, you're like, yeah, they all sound the same. But they do sound different from an F2 car or from anything else. And in the film, they used F2 cars for our actors. So all of our cars had to be replaced.
They had to be 80-yard.
They had to be 80-yard. That's right. We 80-yard.
The cars had to be 80-yard. I love it.
To kind of condense this, Joe gave us the opportunities. He gave us the resources, both personal resources through F1. He gave us the opportunity to get to the tracks. At one point, he set up a meeting with Lewis Hamilton, and we reviewed, and Lewis just went, "That's wrong. That's wrong.
Really?
That's wrong."
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, we had done great research on, okay, at Silverstone, when you're going from turn 1 to turn 3, we know that we accelerate and then we downshift into turn 3, we downshift into turn 4, then we accel back into turn 5, we go down the hangar straight, and we're up to 8th gear, and every single turn, every single beat on that track has a speed and a gear. And we said, okay, we know that we need to be in 5th gear right here, going to 8th gear. And Lewis would listen to it and go, yeah, that's right, but you recorded that on turn 9, and this is turn 5, and I usually lift off right here, so I can tell that it's from the wrong turn. I was like, uh-oh. And which car are you using for this? And, is that... So he was very generous and polite with his critiques. It was just like, if you want this to be authentic, this is what you need to do. And so after that meeting, Joe said, we're sending you to Abu Dhabi. We ended up going twice to Abu Dhabi, and the reason is that they have a day where all the cars are out without helicopters, without music without audience. Because that was the other challenges. We did some recordings at other races. Like Gwen and I got to go to Las Vegas, which is a blast. Juan was supposed to go.
I couldn't make it.
Went to Silverstone, went to Abu Dhabi twice, and then we had another gentleman, Richard Thomas, who was following production and recording all of the live mics around the track. So we had terabytes of sound that we had to pour through, but we made sure that every single turn, every single pit stop, every single event was authentic with the right speed, the right perspective, and then Juan had to, be an octopus and manage all of this.
Sort through all that stuff, yeah.
And then ultimately, the other thing was getting the onboard. And again, Joe being such, an invested filmmaker in the sound, would literally go to Toto Wolff, the head of Mercedes, and say, we need to get a rig on one of your cars. Toto said, not going to happen. And the one day...
Is part of that because, there's that whole part, we see the drivers take off their watches before they... it feels like every ounce
Absolutely.
They want out. They don't want any extraneous weight, even your microphone rig
Absolutely.
On that car. They don't want that.
There is an onboard microphone for the broadcast, but it's because it's broadcast quality, it's a lower resolution, and we really wanted to get the highest fidelity we could. And so we did a lot of research, and there are these little Zoom F3 recorders, which are 32-bit, they're great, and I showed it to them and they went, no way. It weighs less than a pound.
Too heavy.
Way too heavy. They're like, you're not putting that on our car. Even for like a test day, they're like, you're not putting that on our car. So we did a bunch of research. We found these things that basically look like matchbooks, and they're about the weight of a matchbook, and they record 32-bit, and they're like, you can do that. And so we put 2 of those on George Russell's car. Our production guys, Gareth and his team, were able to get some recorders on in a couple of other races. And we used all that material liberally to present and portray being in the car, and it worked out well, thankfully.
I think you both talked about the accuracy of the pit stops. Is that what the pit stops actually sound like? That's
yeah, for sure.
Those are real pit stop recordings. They actually, during a test day, they'll roll the cars in and do their practice pit stops without the engine, and that was gold. You had to be there. We were there at Las Vegas. And you have to be there at the right time, but they let certain VIPs come through and watch, and I just happen to be there with microphones, and you can walk right up, and they're doing all of their practicing for the pit stops.
That makes a lot of sense, and that works. That works when things are going well for the races in the movie. But we were talking about the Silverstone race sequence, which I love because, look, it's not that I have anything against music, but that's one of the only races in the movie that doesn't have any score or any source music, and it's really just you out there with the sound effects, and obviously things go wrong. Both of our heroes crash.
Right.
Spoiler alert. Both of our heroes crash in that. But so how do you get the sound of the car going out of control and the skidding and bumping on that side stuff? Because they're not gonna do that for you, right? Or did they?
We have that for reference, but it's just slathered in helicopters and crowds and V6 engines and everything else. So yeah, that's movie magic right there.
Yeah. Those a lot of those the gravel sound, like when they go into the gravel, that's the kind of stuff you hear when you do watch the actual race on TV. You hear that gravel, and we were able to find it, and it's almost identical. As far as the crashing goes, of course, we do a little Hollywood stuff in there, but all the curbs that you hear, there's a specific sound that even in as an F1 fan, you hear that curb, that they're driving to the limit. Right. That's what's telling you they're taking that corner as fast as they can, and they're on the edge. And so that little bump sound that you hear, the prrr, prrr, that's real. That's real from races. That's real for fans. They love to hear that stuff.
But where did you get it at that fidelity?
Standing at turn 1 in Abu Dhabi, standing
there
absolutely
doing your thing.
That was one of the biggest gifts they gave us and it was a lot of work, working with F1, or a lot of negotiating to, this guy is going to go and he's going to walk all around the track, and we need to let him be there. And sometimes you'd go up to a particular person at a gate, and they're like, you're not coming through here. So you'd go to the next person at the next gate. You kind of sneak around.
That's funny.
But yeah, you have to get there. And the thing is that in the beginning, we're working, and thankfully we did these early temps, and we could kind of figure out. Juan was great about saying, I don't have this. Where's this? I don't have you hitting the limiter as you enter into the pit stop. You need to get that. And we don't have, off the grid, we don't have a good enough excel from 1 to 8 down this straight. And of course, these cars are going 200 miles an hour. So, the shots are these long lens shots of this car going, 200 miles an hour for like 10 seconds. And you point your mic at that and it's like, how do I get a car to go for 10 seconds when it's on the other side of the world by the time, it goes by you? So that was, another challenge, is just figuring these things out. So by doing these temps early on, we were able to assess what we have that works and what we don't have that we need to get. And then our filmmakers would, give us opportunities to go out there and record it.
I want to talk about the Monza sequence, because I got to say, I think it's my favorite sound moment in the film. And I warned you up front, spoiler alerts, we're going to talk about the Monza sequence. So if you haven't watched the movies, hit pause right now, go watch the movie and then come back. So, without getting into too much of the specifics, obviously this is kind of the emotional centerpiece of the movie, and the race ends with a really horrific crash. And so you guys make a really interesting decision, which is to get very almost impressionistic with the track at that point. The car becomes airborne, crashes, and the track goes down to almost like a very soft music, piece of music that's almost like more like an ambient bed. And I gotta say, so I saw the movie a few days ago in Los Angeles at a press screening, pretty, jaded industry crowd, but it was packed and people were excited about the movie. That sequence happened and you could hear a pin drop, and then you could hear people gasping, as the car is like sailing through the air, and then and people had like a really audible reaction to it. And then there's the explosion, and somebody behind me said, "Oh my God." And it just reminded me what I love about movies. Like, we're there as a group to have this communal experience. And it was really interesting to me to realize that by you guys taking most of the sound out, it enabled us to have that kind of group experience and to share in this thing together. So I love the way you guys mix that sequence. So was that always the way that it was conceived? Did it kind of go through an evolution? Talk to me about that decision and sort of how you guys approach the mix for the scene.
I think Joe always knew that's what he wanted to do. And even from the temp one, that's kind of how we played it. I got to say, Joe knocked it out of the park with that sequence, because letting the audience experience what you're seeing in silence or in a very low music thing, that's just a goosebump moment for anybody. And Al and Gwen and I, we were actually lucky to go down to LA to one of the preview screenings early on.
This is one of the audience test screenings.
Audience test screening, yep. Uh-huh. One of the first big ones, and we went down there to check the room and make sure it all played well. And then, of course, we joined in just to see what the crowd reaction was, and it was exactly like that. People were like audible, loud gasps, and I was just like, "Whoa, what's going on here?" But it works. It works really, really well. And I mean, I think it's a group effort from everybody, but I think Joe did have that in mind.
It is a literal pull the rug out from under you moment. And I know we prepared the material, but I think we never intended to use it. And I think there was the possibility that we'd play it muted, poof, and all that. But I think that it just makes it even more real. It's like we really just watch this young man crash and die before our very eyes. And I think also the buildup of the fact that, and the parallel to Sonny. This is our first, reference to, Sonny says to him, wait for turn one. And Joshua, young, eager, new driver, is going to try and pass on the outside at turn 11, and it goes wrong.
Gets himself into trouble.
Yeah. So
doesn't actually die though. as it turns out.
That's right. No, that's right. He comes back.
But you make a really good point in the way that we get rid of it. We have all this intensity and all this anxiousness leading up to this turn, and when we do pull the rug out, it happens over the course of about 2 seconds. And then even those PA announcers, they're kind of mid-sentence. They catch themselves. Oh no! And they don't even finish what they're saying. We kind of let it drift away before they finish their statement, and you leave the audience in that community of the audience to react for themselves. You want to believe the audience kind of reacts as a singularity in that moment. They kind of all have this held breath together. It's one of the magical cinematic moments that we have.
Yeah, as I say, it's like, this is so much better than watching this at home, right? This is why we go to a movie theater, is to have this collective experience. What was the music at that? That's a
There's
piece
a
of
sustain. There's a pad synth sustain before the piano comes in. The piano is not a pure piano. It's got a little bit of grunge on it, a little bit of a process that's on it. And Alan Meyerson is one of the greatest scoring mixers there is. And he prepared that. It was just a matter of what kind of dynamic do we play that with? When does the piano enter? How strong does the piano enter? What kind of statement is that piano making in that moment? Because the suspension is the pad that's just held. It's a beautiful piece. It's a beautiful piece.
And then, of course, it all comes together in Abu Dhabi at the end, the final race.
Can I encourage one other question about sound effects? Like, tell us about Dirty Air.
Dirty Air. Okay, so this is a whole plot line in the film, which is like following. And
Too
Brad
close.
Pitt has this thing about you need to design for the aerodynamics.
Am I supposed to make that safe?
Yeah, what does Dirty Air sound like?
It's a hard thing to audibly communicate the concept of dirty air.
Well,
and it was on my mind early on, like through Temp 1 and Temp 2. I was like, what are we going to do about dirty air? What's happening? And it was only in the final that these guys...
It was definitely a story point. And Joe, there were two things that Joe was, as we started getting more and more really myopic about what does this car sound like? What does this race sound like? What does this event sound like? We sort of said, okay, what does the car sound like? The engine sounds like this, and then, the curbs sound like this, the pit stops sound like this. But then, what does it sound like when the car floor is hitting the ground, which is a very common thing, and Lewis Hamilton referenced that, and Joe became very focused on that. And so in Silverstone, when Sonny is driving around and he's bouncing around, Joe wanted to hear that sound, and we were referencing cars that when you're on board, you can hear that, and it sounds like bad electricity meets, metal scraping. It's a nasty sound, and it's a sound that normally, you'd bring to a mixer and they'd be like, we're not using that, right?
Yeah. No, it was magical distortion is what it was.
So there was that, and then there's the sound of dirty air, which is more of a concept. I mean, it doesn't make a sound. It's the sound of the car engine in front of you as you get too close. And the problem with that in Formula One racing, one is what?
All right, so the problem with dirty air is that when you're getting really close to the car in front of you, the way that the F1 cars are built are for clean air to hit it a certain way to push the car down so you have more traction so you can go faster. Right? That's basically it. Now, when you're stuck behind another car, now the air that you're getting is just whipping around. You get understeer, so you're trying to turn and you can't really turn very well. So it messes up your race. So and then it affects the car's aerodynamics. So you slow down, you don't get enough speed, and you get all this. So that's basically the concept of dirty air.
And so what does it sound like, though?
We're gonna hear that.
And I think that's the thing that was fun working with Juan and all of us working together was there's a lot of things in this movie that are very authentic, but then there's now we want to start telling the story. It's like these cars, for example, these V6 engines, they don't have a lot of low end. How are we going to make these cars sound full? How do we get inside the head of the driver? How do we take these cars and augment the sound? And how do we do things like dirty air? What do we add? How do we add the environment? And so that was really fun, was to give Juan the cars, but then give Juan all of these additional layers and pieces that he was able to weave in and make it feel cinematic and make it feel like a movie and tell these stories. And so the idea of the dirty air was, we were literally using like low flutters and rumbles and things that you wouldn't normally be able to record from all you'd get is noise. So it was fun to layer those in and move them around.
I mean, is that really what those 5 red lights sound like when they're really?
Yeah.
That's a great sound.
F1 came
That's
up
a great
with those
sound.
sounds. That is an F1
Well, that was
sound.
the other good thing about this movie, because it was F1 sanctioned, right? And F1 was like, yes, you have access, Joe. Here's, you can go shoot your movie here. You have all this stuff. We were able to use all the sounds that, as an F1 fan, we hear it every Sunday. Every weekend there's a race. These are the sounds you're hearing. That's definitely one of them. It's, just the boop, boop. Boop. You hear all this stuff.
It's thrilling.
Yeah, it's great.
So Abu Dhabi, again, without getting into too many spoilers, that last lap, when our hero is coming in and
He's flying.
he's flying. That's right.
What's
That's
happening?
right. Yeah, I love that, because you actually set it up earlier in the movie in that dialogue sequence, which the dialogue in that sequence was so crystal clean and clear when they're having that conversation.
Balcony?
Yeah.
The Vegas balcony?
Yeah. Is that all?
Wow.
Is
That was pretty much just straight off the mic.
That's
right?
all Gwen. That was all Gwen.
was that ADR?
That was a trouble. That was
No,
a trouble.
all
That was
production.
arguably the hardest production track in the film.
Just because of the noise of Vegas?
Yeah.
It was all Sunnyside. Sunnyside sounded like crap.
There's a Bellagio fountain down below.
Yeah, traffic outside.
I literally made a note to myself during that sequence. This dialogue sounds so good.
Wow.
Well, great. Then
Congratulations, Gwen and dialogue team. Well
we
done.
fooled them again. No, okay.
So they set that up, which is talking about, when it's working, he starts to feel like he's flying, and you guys set that up so nicely. Was there even I feel like there was some wind going through there, he is air, it's a nice, it's so satisfying for the audience.
Well, the whole thing referencing that he's flying. So we wanted to strip away the cars, make it more about wind and air, and very in his head. Then the music does a callback to
The We Will Rock You.
The We Will Rock You.
It's the first time.
That's a callback, which I don't know if everyone's going to get, but maybe they will now. And then also at the last minute, we decided on some of those turns to add a little bit of a crowd. Like you can hear the crowd kind of cheering him on through there. If you listen carefully, you can hear that as well. So it was just more referencing flying. Like what would flying feel like if you were just,
Yeah.
with just you flying. There it is.
Of course, you're on the Dolby podcast, so I have to ask you about Dolby Atmos. Talk to me about the way you used Atmos in the track on this film.
There were no car objects.
Wow, Gwen. Spoiler alert.
I know. You let the cat out of the bag.
I've always thought that one of the greatest things that Dolby Atmos has is your full frequency range surrounds. And that's where I think giving these cars enough weight is when they're flying and I'm panning them around the room. I never lost that energy in the low end, which I thought was fantastic. And just also for music, everything, just it gives it that great balance for the whole room to feel a certain way. Gary did definitely take advantage of objects with music and all kinds of stuff. So yeah,
I've heard. Oh, the PA, sure. I've heard Hans Zimmer talk. He's pretty passionate about Dolby Atmos. So did you have a lot of separation so that you could move stuff around?
Yeah, I mean, those guys always bring a beautiful fillet of their scores. It's not just strings and brass and synths and that's it. It's a full fillet, and strategically we like to choose things and pull them out and separate them without making too much separation to undo the inherent integrity of the mix that those guys have put a lot of effort into. We want to maintain that. At the same time, we want to take advantage of the spectrum that we have. The initial mixes were given to us from Alan Meyerson in 7.1, and so we would pull certain things. Sometimes it's the choir, sometimes it's the brass, certain things out into the room. Sometimes it's just into what I call the proscenium speakers, just to get it off the screen but still maintain the stereo image. Sometimes it's a little bit further than that, a little bit more over, into the hood of the theater. I have a lot of fun with the songs. We referenced Led Zeppelin earlier. I think this was a great opportunity to present Whole Lot of Love in a way that nobody had really heard before. We've all heard the stereo masters. We've all heard what it sounds like on vinyl, but this is a different context for this. So, take a little bit of liberty, try something, blow it up in a way that maybe is refreshing. I kind of liked it. I got a kick out of it, and it's a big Daytona race. It's a lot of fun. Did that with all the other cues as well. A lot of those cues were presented in stereo originally, in splits, but in stereo, and they came from a variety of, all the appropriate producers and artists, and we of course try to maintain, like I said, those the intention of those mixes while putting it into the context of the film within the hemisphere that is Atmos. So pulling things into the surrounds, giving it a little bit of movement, giving it a little bit of life without deconstructing it too far. But I'll say that as much as we used it on the music, it's the use of objects on the PAs that help give you the feeling of being in the arena. And we're constantly changing the degree to which you are in the stadium or in the environment versus pure, clear clarity. And I could go into this and get super nerdy about it. Edit out what you want to edit out here.
Our audience is here for you.
I use a variety of delays more than anything to place in different places around the theater to emulate what would be all the reflections of a PA system in the exterior. And that's a lot of fun. Sometimes that's overwhelming, so we have to, find a quick, simple, efficient but accurate way of pulling it back and to either turn it up or turn it down given any line and what the line is up against, whether it is up against a car by that's happening. And certainly we did a lot of tricky editorial with bumping this line a little bit to the left or to the right to get out of the way to allow the sound effect to go through, or speeding up maybe just half of this sentence just a little bit to allow that car by to go through. That was definitely an editorial and mix collaboration with everybody. Our picture editor, Stephen Marioni, involved in that heavily as well, where we're all trying to maximize what is being communicated without getting in the way of anybody else's intensity of their own sound department, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, there's overheads, there's wide channels, there's surround channels, there's all kinds of slap happening. And again, back to perspectives, we want to play the enthusiasm of the perspectives as you're cutting inside to announcers versus outside with reflections. And when you have a true hemisphere of sound, you can have a lot of fun with that versus if you're stuck with a stereo image and you're committing to that stereo image, you're locked into that. Atmos is fun for that. That's the joy of immersive.
It prevents the same sameness. It's always new. It's always different. And these races, they could have been very static, but they're not.
You got a lot of races in this movie.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure it was a challenge to kind of differentiate and to sort of also, just to your point, to keep it from getting monotonous.
Yeah. I think Joe really thought about this, about how am I going to present all these different races to an audience that maybe doesn't know Formula One, or what is all this, what? But he did a really great job of saying, okay, every race is going to sound different. And so we have Silverstone has no music. Then we have Hungary that does have music, and it's a driving music, and it's fun, and it's kind of like taking you along. Then you have Monza, which is the score that's going to really kind of like take you into this really big moment that happens in the movie. And then you're going to have a montage with some pop songs. And then that way, every race has its own kind of
Vegas
identity.
Is very different.
Oh, yeah, and Vegas,
Driving
too.
Angry and the whole...
Yeah, Driving Angry, we're going to be underwater in this whole race, and you feel that. And I thought that Vegas sequence came out really great, too, because... even though those sounds were all being filtered and kind of, underwater and muted, you still got that the cars are going really fast, and then you can hear them underneath there. And then I thought that was really fun.
Yeah, and to go with that, there was a point when we were in our final mix process where I remember Joe was saying, we are too announcer centric. The announcers are now the narrator of the story. We need to know what they're saying, but we need to make sure the drivers are taking priority in terms of focus and attention in the scope and the arc of the story. So let's do a whole nother pass and let's consider that. And so we wound up pulling PAs back and pushing drivers up and keeping that, really making the story about the teams and not necessarily about the PA, as much as that narrative is important and those facts, certainly for people like me that don't know the sport, that information is crucial, but that's not really what the story is about. It's not what the film is about. Hang on to being attached to Joshua and Sonny and Kate and our team.
Juan, I understand that you mix on a Pro Tools control surface. And Gary, I understand that you mix on a DFC.
Yeah, I do a combination.
So tell me about that, and why are those the right tools for the job, and how do you guys? Because it must introduce some complication to kind of mix and match tools in the mix.
Well, at Skywalker, they do an amazing job at being able to integrate multiple surfaces and multiple tools to do the job. That's the one thing. Engineering here has figured out a way to have an S6 next to a DFC next to a Wacom tablet. Mm-hmm. Whatever.
Okay, there you
You were the first person I ever saw mixing on a tablet.
Do you know anybody else that now does it? I know maybe one other person that tinkers with it, but yeah, kudos to Steve Morris and engineering at Skywalker, because they do enable all of, well, I'll use the label, the sound artists that are here, whether you're a supervisor, a designer, or a mixer, or an editor. They enable you to use the tools that you are most comfortable with to breathe your breath into the track that you are providing and your contribution to the track. Like, that is huge. It is so huge. So yeah, I won't speak for one, but I'll say the S6 and the integration of that into the current version of Pro Tools, that's a great tool for sound effects when you are trying to keep track of thousands of tracks, categorically breaking it down. You can keep it really, really well organized. And that's really the key, as I see it with effects mixing in today's era, is it is a very, very broad palette that you're using to create your mix. With dialogue, it's a little bit different. The track count isn't nearly as wide, and you're usually doing concentrated work on fewer tracks at a time. You're working on the production tracks, 1 through 12, and then you're integrating 4 tracks of ADR, and then you've got a couple of reverbs that go with it. Well, that's manageable, and you're a little bit more under the microscope within the waveform of the sound for I think that's an okay way of putting it, versus the sound effects, you're looking at it maybe a little bit more big picture. With the music, it's a different perspective than either of those two things. You're looking at, well, in our world, the music has been gone through by a scoring mixer usually, or by the artist's music mixer first, and so there has already been a pass that's been taken at it, but you're looking at longer stretches of cues and how things play within the scene. For me, I think that for music, the user interface of DFC allows for those big, broad, flowing passes, and the integration of their automation package really caters to that kind of sound material. Mm-hmm. For me, as much as I could be using S6 or I could be using DFC for dialogue, I like being able to get into the track in Wacom Cintiq method, because I can do what I need to do, and I can get very, very, very surgical if I need to, very quickly, without having to turn and go offline. And it's just all my tools are just right there. I don't worry about how a unique set of either noise reduction tools or equalizers or compressors will map to a controller like an S6. I just call it up and the plugin is there. That's a great tool for dialogue. So different tool for different parts of the job. And fortunately, here they enable us to have that.
It was really a fabulous group of people to work with. It was one of the more pleasurable experiences I've had in my long, long career. I would work with any of them again on anything. Even
yeah, we got to give some props to Joe. We got to give some real props to Joe. We've done a number of movies with.
I feel like Joe is really a director who understands how to use sound as a storytelling tool, and he enables you all to bring out your best work.
Totally. Yep, absolutely. He's just, it's like the nicest person to work for, just to talk. Like, just, whenever Gary was doing a music pass or a dialogue pass, we would just be showing each other F1 videos. Did you see what happened? Did you see this? Did you see, oh my God, did you see that? It's just like, he's just like one of us in a way. And it makes a pleasure to work with him all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a shot at the beginning of Abu Dhabi, and it's a shot of Joshua at the beginning of the race, and he's just so excited. And we actually put in a little, ha ha, he's just laughing. He's so excited to be in this race. Like, that's Joe.
Yeah.
That is it, really. If you could wrap up Joe Kosinski in one shot of this particular film, it's that shot. It's like,
and he will say this, but he says that this is the hardest film, the hardest he's ever worked on a film, and he never let a single ball drop. He made sure that he was invested and allowed the time and just poured himself into it, and he stays even. And even when things aren't working sonically, he's not like, this isn't working. It's just, you just keep going. Yeah. And it'll get there, and we're going to get there together, and you try things, and he sees the greater goal, which is this will come together. And so he has just a steadfastness about him and a passion for filmmaking that allows us to work in a way that brings out the best in everybody.
So are you guys all going to take up race car driving now?
Yes.
I got my go-kart in the back.
For sure.
It's not unheard of. We know a couple of re-recording mixers who drive race cars.
That's right.
Mr. Borders.
Yeah,
that's
Bo
right.
Borders.
Our good friend Bo Borders.
I was texting with him throughout the film, for sure.
Oh, I'm sure he would have loved to have been here working with you guys on this movie. Yeah. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, like we were joking earlier, but it is a great pleasure to sit down and have these conversations with people that you've known as long as we've all known each other. Thank you for coming on the Dolby podcast today and talking to us about F1.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to see you guys.
Many thanks to Al, Juan, Gary, and Gwen for joining us on the podcast today. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Lucasfilm and Skywalker Sound for graciously letting us come up to the ranch to have this conversation in person. Be sure to check out F1 the Movie, now playing at a Dolby Cinema near you in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. We'll have links, as always, in our show notes. And if you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, be sure you are subscribed to Dolby Creator Talks. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes, or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about what we do at Dolby Creator Lab, head on over to dolbycreatorlab.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of the show, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our camera operator today is Matt Strauss and Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thanks for joining us.